Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Community Exchange podcast, where we talk to friends old and new about their careers and the future of the media industry. I'm Matthew Scott Goldstein, better known as
MSG.
Thank you, Jonah. As always, the Community Exchange podcast is brought to you by OpenWeb, the company that's building a safer, fairer, and more trustworthy internet. Now I have a great conversation for you with Jonah Goodhart, co-founder and CEO of Mobian. Jonah is a seasoned investor, founder, and technology leader who builds and scales category-defining companies, driving innovation and growth at the intersection of media, data, and technology. Okay, Jonah.
Okay.
Where do you want to start?
Get into it.
Where do you want to start?
Anywhere. I mean, look.
Well, you told me the story about mobile to AI. Why don't we go with that?
I mean, so look, I've been in digital advertising and digital and building companies for 27, 28 years, going back to the late 1990s.
Okay, how old are you, Jonah?
I'm 47.
47.
I went to school in upstate New York at Cornell. My two older brothers had gone to school there. And my oldest brother actually was the first entrepreneur in sort of my generation. He built a daily newspaper to compete with the Cornell Daily, the official daily newspaper
crazy.
At Cornell. And then he ended up leaving and starting a magazine. And so I got exposed to the media world and the idea of being an entrepreneur through him. I then went to Cornell and I think got lucky. I got lucky because it was 1996 and the internet had really just started to take off. And of course, in a university setting, everyone was talking about the .com world and what was going to happen. And
it is amazing how luck and timing play into most people's success who I talk to. Yeah,
absolutely. I was exposed to, both my parents are teachers. My mom was an early childhood educator, teacher. My dad was a now recently a retired professor. But I was exposed to the world of universities at an early age, and got sort of infatuated in this idea of computers and connectivity and the power, the potential. And so when in '96 I went to Cornell, things were beginning to take off. I went, oh my God, I want to be a part of this, but didn't know what to do. And my brother and I have two brothers. My middle brother is 2 years older than me, also was at Cornell. And so we started talking about building some sort of a business, and it took us a couple years to do it. But towards my junior year or so of Cornell, we built an email newsletter business.
Okay, were you studying and going to classes and everything?
We were studying and going to classes in the beginning, for sure.
Okay.
And then got obsessed with this building a business idea. And it was happen chance, right? I mean, we were like, wow, something is big. All we knew was something big was happening, and we wanted to be a part of it.
In the internet, and you wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I think the idea for me was, people were making a lot of predictions, and interestingly, most of those predictions came true. Right? People said I remember in the late 1990s, people said, look, this internet thing is going to connect everyone in a way that they've never been connected. And that's going to be used for good and for bad. And I think that has happened. It also is going to enable communication, enable things that we just couldn't do at that time. And I think the timeline of how long some of those things took was different than what people expected. But almost everything happened. People said in the 90s, you'll be able to click a button and food will show up on your door. And that happened. And so I lived through that, ended up building a business that led to meeting someone who made a big impact in my life, this person, Mike Walrath. He was a sales guy at DoubleClick. He ended up selling us media, and our first company bought a lot of media. He then called me one day. My brother and I went out to dinner with him, and he said, I want to start a company basically to make media more efficient, effective, in sort of some of the ways that we had been talking about, and that led to the creation of something called Right Media.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Some people haven't at this point. It's years ago, but Right Media was the first scaled ad exchange. So Jeff Green had started AdECN, which was really the first ad exchange. And then Right Media ended up being, believe it or not, bigger at the time because Jeff had sold his company to Microsoft. And we were the first investors, board members, helped Mike get Right Media off the ground. Right Media would sell to Yahoo in 2007, at which point, I sort of had this feeling of I want to start another company, but this time I want to do something a little bit different than what we had done in the past. We'd never taken venture capital. We had never gone down that sort of path as Mike had with Right Media. And so my brother and I said, let's start a new company. And so it took us, again, a couple of years. It's always a couple year time period for us to figure out what we're doing, to iterate, to ideate, et cetera. And then in 2010, we started Moat. And Moat was really, in some ways, it was a evolution or a continuation of Right Media. Right Media was about media buying, was about effective sort of bidding and algorithms and real-time bidding and all of that. Moat really asked a different question, but related, which was in the world where brands are going to buy media digitally as opposed to in the offline world, and that was an obvious trend at that point. How is brand advertising going to work? How is storytelling going to work?
So let me pause for a sec.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Moat was 2010.
Yeah.
And it's 15 years ago.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was much more recent. And when you decided to start Moat, it was you and who else? It was
Me
you?
and my brother Noah.
Okay.
And so we've started all of our companies since the 90s together, and Mobian as well recently. And we basically said, okay, there's a problem, and the problem is
you saw white space.
Yeah, here's the problem we saw.
Because whatever we're talking about now, we're going to talk about the same thing in 2025.
Right. So that's right. And so the problem we saw was that brands were spending a lot of money telling their story. Coca-Cola would talk about opening up happiness as an example. There was this sort of emotional brand narrative attached to brands that we all recognize from television, but that hadn't made its way into digital. And so the question we asked was, how are brands going to storytell in digital? And the answer we came up with initially for Moat was, we're going to tell stories using different creative than how people have done it to date. And so we thought the problem was that there were basically poor execution of ads, that banners looked bad, and they didn't do sort of a good job telling stories. Video really hadn't come along.
And they were right back then at that point.
And they were probably right. The solution we had, we were wrong about. Our solution for Moat was to build a crowdsourced creative marketplace. That was our idea. And initially, we went to market with that idea. We built an ad search engine that people...
Did you have a lot of confidence in Moat, considering all the success you had at Right Media?
We had confidence, but look, what I'll tell you is that when you have some past success, it's great, and you can get a meeting. But a CFO is not going to sign a $500,000, $1 million check because you did something in the past.
Right, to get your foot in the door.
Gets your foot in the door, but they want to know what you can do for them today. And so, from our perspective, we saw an opportunity, which was to help brands make digital work for them. And so we iterated a bit, would end up meeting Mark Howard at Forbes. Forbes became our first client 2 years into it in 2012.
And we all love Mark Howard dearly.
We love Mark Howard. And what we ended up building was a measurement company. And that was what Moat became known for, was verification,
when you envisioned
measurement,
the company,
viewability.
it was never about measurement and viewability, right?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Initially, no. I mean,
so
measurement was happen chance, because we had somebody say to us, you're going to build all these great ads, you say, but how are you going to measure what success looks like? And I said, well, how do you measure it today? And they said, we measure whether somebody clicks on an ad. And I said, nobody clicks on ads, so that's not a very good measurement. And they said, well, that's all we have. And so that kind of spurred on this idea of we need a better way to measure success.
At what point did you realize you had to pivot Moat from its initial idea to this new one?
Yeah.
Like, you make it sound easy, but it must not have been easy.
No, it wasn't easy. I mean, we went out and had, I remember Mike Walrath had said to me, go have 800 meetings, literally. Go meet with everybody that will meet with you, and see what their problems are, and try to problem solve. And when I went to those meetings, people said, my problem is this, not, this other thing. Okay. And so we identified measurement as a problem, and then viewability sort of came onto the scene around 2011 or so. We started working on it. And what we noticed as the opportunity with viewability was that publishers were being harmed. And we thought publishers were being harmed unfairly. So basically, there were two companies in the newly born verification space, who were showing up to publishers saying, basically, you're stealing money from advertisers.
These two companies were
Integral Ad Science and Double Verify.
Thank you.
Still exist today.
Yep.
And they were saying, you're stealing money from the advertisers, and we're here to take it back. That was basically their narrative. And so publishers felt like, we just got through transitioning to digital, taking our magazine and newspaper world and radio world and making it digitized and selling inventory. We're not stealing anything from anybody. We built great relationships with partners. And so we showed up and said, yeah, we think that's right, actually. There is a real issue with ads not necessarily showing up on the screen. For sure, there's a real valid issue with viewability, but the intent was not to harm. And so let's help publishers figure out how to solve this. And in doing so, let's go beyond viewability. Let's start thinking about things like attention, and let's start thinking about
these are
how a
new
publisher creates
metrics
value.
you sort of created for the ecosystem?
Absolutely. So we started with viewability. In a lot of ways, viewability became the focus of everything. People would probably remember us more as a viewability company than anything else. But we used to call our product attention analytics, and it was about understanding scroll speed and scroll depth and pause rates and all sorts of things that what we were trying to do was to say this: attention is our scarcest resource, and
Still is today.
still is today. And so how are we measuring human attention? And if we can do that, we have an opportunity to help brands be more successful in marketing. So we started on the publisher side, eventually became a solution for publishers and advertisers. We built a 1,000 client, $100 million annual recurring revenue business and sold to Oracle in 2017.
So 7 years in, sold. That's crazy.
It was an amazing run. We had a great several hundred people team, and it was, learned a tremendous amount. And then I spent almost 3 years, just under, at Oracle.
How was that?
Honestly, looking back on it, it was actually great.
Okay.
At the time, I think it was, somebody said to me, "Where have you worked in terms of big companies before?" And the answer was nowhere. It was my first corporate job, because all of the rest of what I had done to date had just been building companies. Our first company we built, but we didn't sell. Second company in Right Media was Mike sold it and went to Yahoo, but I didn't go work at Yahoo. And so at Moat, it was really the first company where I had an opportunity to go work at a big company. I had, previously in college, I had an internship at Merrill Lynch. I had worked at a real company before, but not really as an adult. And so I had this opportunity to work in a big, interesting company. I learned a tremendous amount. Looking back on it, it was a great experience. And interestingly, looking back on it, it was really right before AI would come onto the scene, which I think is obviously the next big thing that I'm spending all of my time and
I
attention
have
on.
a hard time envisioning you knowing who you are working for a big corporate company, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's what I'll tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
I had a conversation at one point with someone very senior at Oracle, and I was
Not Larry.
I had actually had a number of meetings and conversations with Larry, and I found him to be fascinating.
Okay.
I found him to be an entrepreneurial spirit. He would ask questions that other people weren't asking. And, his view was, why not? Why can't we do that? Let's try it. And very different than I think his public facing persona. I found him to be a very, very smart person. But the conversation I had was not with Larry. It was with someone else. And, I said, "Why do you do it this way?" And it was some internal system. And it was like, you have to check 1 million boxes and it takes forever. And they said to me, "Well, we have 140,000 employees. So if you can come up with a better system to maintain what we need to maintain, then great, we'll do it your way." And I remember thinking, I remember thinking, that's a hard problem.
Okay.
I get why you do it that way. And the other thing I said, I learned actually from the CEO of Oracle, Safra. I asked her a question. She personally approves a lot of things in the company, and I said, "Why do you personally approve all of this? Like, why does it come to you?" And she said, "It's pattern recognition." And I thought that's super, super interesting, because you can have systems that do a lot of things, but when you're trying to be an executive and trying to make smart decisions, what are the patterns that you're seeing, and sort of what is the essence of what you're seeing that you can learn from. So I learned a lot from my experience there. At the time, if you asked me, I would have said, "Oh my God, I'm working in a big company. I don't know what I'm doing. This is different."
Okay.
But looking back on it, I learned
I could
a
spend
lot.
hours talking about this, but I want to move on. So why did you decide to leave in 2020 after 3 years? Like, what was the impetus of all that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I never planned to stay there forever.
Did you stay for the people?
Absolutely. Well, I stayed beyond.
Employees?
I had we had a couple hundred employees. I had a contract that was a couple years. I stayed longer than my contract, and I wanted to see our people get to a good place.
Okay.
There was some internal stuff that had happened. The person running our group left, a new person came in, and I wanted to see our people sort of get to a decent place in the end of the day. Look, my feeling was I'm going to start a company again, and that's my identity.
You knew that.
I knew that.
Okay.
It's who I am. I want to start, build, work on, create companies. And so, my brother and I talked about it, and we said, yeah, let's go work on something. And honestly, before we built Mobian, we started a venture studio called Montauk Labs. And the idea was just to work on
Can we spend
ideas.
a couple minutes just on Montauk, like how that all came about?
Yeah. So the Montauk story is I started visiting Montauk, back in the mid 2000s, probably 2005, six,
Okay.
seven, something in that order of magnitude. And ended up buying a house out there in 2007 with my wife. We decided to start spending our summers out there at the time. We ended up investing in the Surf Lodge, which
The
was
the, the,
created
the famous surf
the famous
lodge.
Surf Lodge, which was created in 2008,
Okay.
2009, thereabouts, by, as it turned out, my wife's sister, Jama.
That's
And
crazy. I didn't know that connection.
there's a family connection
Okay.
there. But we were investors in this thing. And fast forward a couple years into it, we ended up, me and Mike and Noah ended up buying the rights to Surf Lodge. Essentially, we ended up buying the brand and the family of brands that are
Okay.
associated with Surf Lodge. Jameis still runs the business that operates as the Surf Lodge, the hospitality company. We don't have anything to do with that, but we own the brand. And we ended up launching the Snow Lodge as a sister brand. So we have a place in Aspen called the Snow Lodge. We have the Surf Lodge in Montauk. And it's phenomenal. And watching what Jama has done with that place, 15 years into it.
This is your wife's sister.
This is my wife's sister, my
Wow.
sister-in-law. She has just built a incredible brand, an incredible asset that, really what the Surf Lodge does is it creates experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that when we think about, we're going to talk about AI, when we think about the world of AI, I think the question is how AI intersects with experiences.
Okay.
That's what
Before we get to AI, so I just want to ask a couple more questions before we get to AI. So 2020, you sold, you left Oracle.
Left Oracle,
Okay.
2019.
2019.
So end of 2019, I said to my wife, I've promised you for years that we are going to go on a world tour. It is November 2019, and 2020 is our year. So we are gonna
bad timing, Jonah.
we're gonna travel the world. We're gonna take the kids, and this is our year. And yeah, lo and behold, enter COVID, and plans were changed. So that was
Okay, and then the studio you started, and
Yeah.
because you're a prolific investor, right? Like I just hear stories about, oh, Jonah's in that one, Jonah's in that one. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, I do it with the same group of folks as me, Mike and Noah, and we invest in a lot, for sure. But I would say my passion is the entrepreneurs behind these companies.
Okay.
We're not professional investors. We're not, writing these enormous checks for the most part. It's about being supportive of the ecosystem. It's about being involved. It's about seeing trends. It's about learning.
I was going to get to the point, like if you're
Yeah.
making that many investments, you're seeing a lot of what's
see a
happening
lot.
in the ecosystem.
We see a lot. Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I learn as much from entrepreneurs as hopefully I provide some value to them as well. But I learn a lot from.
Are you telling all these entrepreneurs to go on 800 meetings as well?
I have given that advice to folks. It's a B2B thing. So if you're going to go into B2B, the people you're selling to literally will tell you what their problems are, and they'll tell you
If you listen.
if you listen,
Yeah.
here are the problems. Here's what we're trying to solve for. Here's our pain point. And if you're going to start a good B2B company, it's about solving pain points, right? It's not about vitamins. It's about solving headaches. It's about solving pain. And so,
Yeah, like you say that, I always say there's white space in there somewhere, and that's where you need to figure out where it is and try to solve that problem.
yeah, and I think so getting to our most recent company, Mobian, the idea
When did you start Mobian?
so the timing again is a little bit fluid. I would say 2023.
Okay.
We had some ideas. We were working on some healthcare ideas prior to that. We ended up in 2023 saying we're going to do something in the advertising space again. Called up my buddy Mark Howard, went to dinner with him and Jessica Sibley, who had, of course, now both of them were at Time. Jess is the CEO, Mark's the COO. And I said, we're gonna work on a solution in the measurement space again. I think there's still much work to be done in that world. And it'd be great to learn what your problems are and learn what your challenges are. And they, said, we're in, first of all, we want to be first.
Right.
And which was incredibly humbling. And yeah, let me tell you what we're seeing and what are the issues and what are the challenges. And, Mark called me not too long after that with a real problem, which was that in the end of 2023.
Love the story. Go ahead.
Yeah. Time Magazine had named Taylor Swift Person of the Year, and they put it on the cover. And it was the biggest story at Time in 10 years. And it got something like 100 million people to go read the article. And one of the two verification companies, these two public verification companies, marked that content as unsafe. And so Time had this really interesting problem where they had a big advertiser that had advertised on the content, and they got a call from the agency and they said, we want a refund. You're running on brand unsafe inventory.
Producer Andrew's like, what the hell is he talking about? Go finish the story.
So they said, we want a refund. And Mark said, he called me and he said, can you help me navigate this?
Yeah, Mark's like, absolutely, okay.
And he said, what is the content that you all are marking as unsafe? And it took them 3 weeks of back and forth before they even could identify what the 3 weeks to identify what the content was that they were marking unsafe, number one. And number two, why they marked it unsafe. So not just put it into a bucket, we characterize it as violence or something, but why is your model calling it that? So 3 weeks later, they get back a list of articles, campaign sort of specific articles. This is where the ads for this advertiser ran in this campaign. Here was the article, and here's why we marked it as unsafe. Besides the Taylor Swift article, one of them was a violent death, they said. And it turned out it was the violent death of a star in the sky. And the modern multi-billion-dollar public company had called that brand unsafe.
Yeah.
And so we looked at that and said, whoa, there's a problem here. Is this a one-off? Is this an anomaly? Is this just this campaign, or is this a broader issue? And what we discovered really quickly was that, one, at Time, this was a broader issue, but then beyond Time. So once we sort of zoomed out from Time and looked at the entire publisher industry, what we discovered is that between 30 and 50% of publisher inventory today is being, in our view, mischaracterized as brand unsafe by these legacy providers. And
well,
so
don't the legacy providers have to say things are brand unsafe? Otherwise, they don't have a business in some ways.
So there's a number of beliefs about the incentives behind why some of the technology works, why it does. Look, I think a lot of these people are really great people and they mean well. They did not build their systems with AI because it didn't exist at the time that they built their systems. And Moat existed back then as well, and we didn't build.
Well, I would say they who built it last built it better too.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is always an opportunity to disrupt, and great companies will disrupt themselves, and maybe these companies will disrupt themselves. We'll see. But what we decided is there's an opportunity to build something better, and our question was, could we use AI? Could we use specifically initially generative AI and then agentic AI, but generative AI to watch videos, to read content? Could it understand nuance? And one of the sort of conclusions we came to was that AI really, at some level, is about context. That when we talk about the evolution from, semantic understanding to natural language processing, which, by the way, is not a recent thing. These are concepts that have been around for a very, very, very long time. That is all about context. And that idea of how do you understand context and what are the meaning of words? One of the things, our name Mobian is named after a book that my father wrote called Mobian Nights. And he has this great line in his book that I love, which is, he says, we cannot sidestep context. In other words, you can't get around context. Yeah. It is always the thing that unlocks meaning. And it turns out that words have meaning through context. It turns out that situations, that videos, that everything has meaning through context. And I would argue that was essentially what this industry was misunderstanding, was the actual context. Now, it turns out that AI is also very much so about context, and that the way a large language model works, when it goes well, it's about context. Mm-hmm. And some of these, where I get really excited about what's happening in the world of LLMs, for example, with memory and the idea of being able to remember ideas and who you are and what you say and what you like, that is about richer context. And that context is the unlock for AI. And ultimately, I think this is the area that is going to be an interesting focus.
Which sort of goes back to, like, you mentioned healthcare before, and I'm sitting here with you. I'm like, oh, I'm surprised he didn't do something bigger in healthcare. You went back into like this advertising publisher ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, my conclusion on the healthcare side, and I could spend an hour talking about, or 10 talking about healthcare, was that every ecosystem, it was an industry I didn't know at all, first of all. So I spent 2 years studying it, learning about it, reading, going to conferences, meeting, building some products in the space. I learned that it's just as, if not more complex than any other industry. But what I learned in healthcare is that the incentives are very, very odd. They're at odds with each other.
Okay.
And so you have incentives to, for example, insurance companies, they have an incentive actually to write claims because they need to get premiums. In order to get premiums, they have a fixed percentage they can get because of ACA. The law passed in 2011. They can only take 15% of the dollars they take in. And so in order to do that, they have to actually get a lot of premiums. They have to raise your premiums every year the way they do. Anyways, long story short,
like,
I went,
not for me.
These incentives are weird, but they also have an incentive to deny claims. How do those two things live in the same world? They have both incentives at the same time. This is very strange. And so what I concluded was, I think, I could eventually figure out a business there, but it was going to be they talk about a J curve. It was going to be a very long J curve for me to figure that out. I went back to the advertising space and I said, this is the space that I know and understand. And I had a learning, which was, it is about people in the end of the day. Everything we do in life is about people and connection. And I like the people that I get to work with in the advertising ecosystem, and I know them, and I know I can understand how the incentives are. Nothing's perfect in our world, but I can at least try to understand it.
And then Mobian was built with mostly AI technology, right?
Yeah, we started with.
So you saw this before most of us were playing with it, right?
I don't know if we saw it before, but we happened chance again started in around 2023, right? So ChatGPT, when did ChatGPT take off?
November of
2023.
Right.
And so, we looked at that and said.
No, November 22.
Well, yeah, ChatGPT launched, and then when I would argue when it became the thing that all of us knew about, somewhere in that, several month time period.
Again, timing, good timing.
Luck, right?
Yeah.
Lucky. But we looked at it. I would say the thing that we did is we looked at it and we said, there has got to be an application for this in the world that we understand. We just didn't know what that was. Then brand safety came onto the scene because Mark Howard called me and said, there's a problem. And in my head, we said, this is a perfect problem to be solved by AI. And that sort of launched our effort.
Okay, so Moat started at one thing, moved to something else. Is Mobian doing the same thing? Starts at one thing, going to move to something else?
So Mobian, the idea actually, before we got to brand safety, we were iterating on an idea around unified measurement and what we were calling a measurement marketplace. And so we've already sort of had a little bit of a pivot in the Mobian world because we were initially not talking about context and brand safety. We were talking about unified measurement. What has not changed at Mobian is it's still about measurement. It's about measurement and optimization. It's about helping brands make smarter decisions, about helping publishers make smarter decisions. I think what is similar to Moat is we've started on the publisher side again. So we've gone to Time and Newsweek and the Washington Post and Fox and others and have said, look, you have a real problem, which is that your inventory is being demonetized literally, and we think wrongly. And we think we can help you get back appropriate value for the content that you're creating. And we think that matters not just today, but particularly as we move to an AI world, as we move to a zero-click world, figuring out the value of content, we think is really critical, and it's all about context.
Okay, so with Mobian, you're talking to all these publishers, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned 10, there must be 30, 40, 50 you have. Are you talking to them and also seeing what are they worried about today beyond just the tool that you're offering?
And to be clear, we work with publishers and advertisers, but publishers are worried about a lot, right? I mean, publishers, it's a very interesting dynamic because publishers have gotten beaten up for a long time in the ad space. If, I was reading the numbers on the way over here of the $700 billion in ad spend, of course, still north of 70% of that goes to Google and Meta.
Right.
And so the vast majority of that is not going to open internet, open web publishers, even including CTV, which I think is included as part of open internet. And so the question is, how do they yet they create all the content by and large, right? If you look at Google and Meta, phenomenal companies, they don't create any of the content.
Yeah.
And so the content is still being created elsewhere. And whether it's an influencer or a publisher, a creator, it's still a creator in either case. They're creating the content, and the content is still what humans come for. Now, we can talk about a world of robots, and when a bot, which I think, by the way, is a super interesting conversation. So if you have a robot doing your dishes at home, what brand are they going to choose for washing your dishes may not be the same one that you choose as a consumer. So I think that's an interesting place to go.
Well, and the same thing, if you have a robot or a bot doing your searching to get your news in the morning, what is that, you doing it, Jonah, or is it a robot, and how does that get classified?
Absolutely. And in the end of the day, so what do I know for sure? I know that content matters. I know that quality content matters because as human beings, we still want connection. We still want experiences. We still want to live a good life. We still want love. We still want emotion. We still want all of the things that make us, I think, human. And so the people that create those experiences, that create that content, absolutely still matter. But how it manifests itself is going to change. And so one of the things, I was talking with a publisher recently, and we were doing a query in the LLMs. And one of the questions we asked was, who are the most influential people in the world?
And you asked this across 10 different LLMs, right?
And we asked this across 10 different LLMs, and every single one of them, literally Gemini, Grok, et cetera, OpenAI, came back with answers that included Time Magazine as one of the sources. And so I said to Mark Howard, how do you think about how you show up in that world, and how do you think about the evolution of that, and how do you think about optimizing how you show up in that world? Mm-hmm. Mark happens to be one of the very forward-thinking people in how a publisher, how content shows up in AI. But I think those are the questions that we have to start to ask: is how are you showing up, and what can you do about it if you're not showing up in the place that you want to be? And perhaps beyond that, I saw a really fascinating interview with the CFO of OpenAI recently, Sarah Fryer, and she said 90% of the world's content is not publicly accessible. 90%, at least of the world's. I think the quote she had was the world's content that matters. Okay. And so it's company content. It's behind doors. It's university content. It's all sorts of data that is not simply publicly accessible on the web.
I didn't think it'd be 90%. It's a huge number.
Huge number. Yeah. And if you think about what are the ingredients to that, I mean, products and product ingredients, and everything from things that I think would be obvious to things that I think are less obvious. And so if you think about, all right, data matters, but is it only the data that's publicly accessible today, or is there data that's not publicly accessible today that is also going to be critically important? And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, as we move to this AI first world, and just like we went to a digital first world and then to a mobile first world, we are now in an AI first world.
Can you say that one more time? Because when you said that, we were talking earlier, I thought that was so dead on.
Yeah. So
back at Cornell
in the late 1990s, we absolutely moved from
and by the way, this is the title of this podcast. Go ahead.
We moved from a legacy media world to a digital first media world.
And every company did it, but it took a while. And
every company did it.
Long process.
That's right. And the predictions were generally right, by the way, in that world. But things weren't exactly. And the companies that succeeded, one of the fascinating things is the companies who were the top companies at the time didn't necessarily become the top companies, right? Google wasn't the first search engine. Meta wasn't the first social network. Amazon wasn't the first e-commerce company. I mean, the list goes on and on. In 2010, when we did Moat, mobile had really come onto the scene at that point.
And that's where Google was behind, right? And Facebook was behind.
Facebook was behind, right? We think of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp as mobile first.
Right. 90+% of the traffic.
Of course,
was all
not
mobile.
desktop.
Yeah.
Facebook was entirely desktop.
Right.
It was 100% desktop. And they transitioned to mobile. We talked about companies being able to disrupt themselves, and I think they've done a good job of that. So we went from a digital first world we entered into in the late 1990s to a mobile first world we entered into in the 2008, 9, 10s, et cetera. And of course, we are now in an AI first world. And so in that AI first world, how are experiences changing? How are brands changing? What still matters? What doesn't matter? For example, what still matters? I think emotion. I think emotion is core to who we are as human beings. I think it's how we make decisions.
Is it emotion of reading the content, of viewing the content?
It's the emotion of the people in the end of the day. It's our emotional reaction to things. Are we happy, sad, angry, joyful, disgusted, etc.? The emotion of the people matters. Now, the emotion of the content is also a trigger for that and is an input to that. And so what we choose to consume from an emotional standpoint matters. But I would say this category of emotion is critical to humanity. I would say the category of emotion historically has not been critical to computers. And so that you don't ask the question of, is my computer joyful today, or is it sad today?
Right.
That it doesn't. Computers aren't emotional, right? And so, but that is core to who we are as humans, and it's core to how we make decisions. And so, in my mind, I think about how do these two worlds sort of intersect. So, everything is going to be AI first, absolutely. how does human emotion and connection sort of play into an AI first world?
Okay. When there was digital, do you think anyone in the digital world saw AI coming in 12, 13, 14 years?
I mean,
Guess
I'm sure people
people
talked
did.
about it, and I'm sure there's papers and people
Right.
that
And
said
and
things.
maybe AI won't even be happening now if chat didn't come around and did what they did, because Google had it, but they just weren't doing anything with it. They didn't want it.
Yeah, and maybe digital wouldn't have been the same had Google not come up
Right.
with the search engine that
And
just
do you
works.
think there's another one after this in 10 or 15 years? That
I
we're not-
do.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are always going through some sort of cycle. I don't know if it will be, something that we are going to recognize or characterize this way, but every 5 years or so, there is something new, like a TikTok or a Google or a Meta, that didn't exist 5 years before that. Now, ChatGPT and OpenAI and a whole slew of other AI companies. 5 years from now, there will absolutely be a company that none of us have heard of today, or that maybe doesn't exist today, that will be top of mind for
Okay.
all of us.
And what does community look like in this new AI world? Like, what's your perception of that?
Yeah, community is as important or more important in my view. And so bringing people together, if humans are ultimately still to be served or to be sort of involved in the equation, and somebody made a great comment the other day, which was, look, computers can do a lot. Robots are tremendously advancing. Are you impressed by a robot that can run a marathon? I mean,
No, absolutely
not
not.
really.
No,
Maybe it'd
not
be
at all.
fascinating to watch for a second.
Yeah.
But like, if you're like, that robot ran a marathon again, not at all. But when a human runs a marathon, that's fascinating. What was their story? What was their journey? It's not the fact that they ran the marathon. It's the emotion behind it. It's the story behind it. And so that's where my head goes, which is, how are we bringing these two worlds together? It's not the utility of the thing so much. That's why I don't think humans get replaced. We will think we still matter a lot. It's not the thing itself. So yes, can a robot fold laundry, which is incredible, and they can now, and that will absolutely change how brands appear. And so those are the things that we have to think about. But humans very much so still matter in that equation.
So there's a point of view of the future, and it might be a year away, it might be 2 years away, 3 years away, that you, Jonah, you're going to have the robots or the bots get you the news in the morning
Yeah.
with your agent and say, here's my 10 or 15 sources, get me my news, and I want it in this format. Like, do you see that happening? Do you see that happening soon?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
And I think I don't think
Because I talked to some people like, what are you talking about? You're like, of course it's going to happen.
No, of course, yeah. And I don't think we're that far off from
Okay,
that,
right.
to be honest.
I personally think once Google Chrome adds AI into the browser, it's all going
Yeah.
to change very quickly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to think about something a little bit more earth-shattering would be what happens when mobile devices change and it's not simply a phone in the way that we think about a phone. So, if Johnny Ive and what they're building at
Right.
OpenAI ends up becoming a reality, and we're not talking about sort of a physical device that we're looking at all day long. Somebody made the argument to me the other day that maybe we move to a world with less screen time because AI is just sort of integrated everywhere around us.
Wouldn't that be great?
Maybe, yeah. Perhaps, and sort of in that world, the thing that will be the same is humans still matter, connection still matters, emotions still matter, and content still matters.
Well, and I'll get to my next point. So you wake up in the morning, it goes to your 10 or 12 sources, it's approved, you're paying or not paying for the content.
Yeah.
You get it what you want, you get alerts, the whole thing. How then do you have conversations about the news in the world going forward? Like, you don't want you and the bot just talk all the time. How do you talk to other people and get that emotional conversation going with other?
Yeah, I mean, emotional connection is critical, and it's funny. So I remember AOL's Instant Messenger.
So do I.
Right, back in the day, that didn't go away. It just changed its name. Right, it's called WhatsApp, or if you're in the corporate world, it's called Slack. But it's still very much so a part of, in fact, more a part of everything that we do. And so the human connection side of it isn't going away, in my view. It's just going to change. It's going to manifest itself a little bit differently.
And then publishers are going to have to fundamentally change the way they react to the bots actually getting content, digesting content, seeing ads or not seeing ads.
Yeah, and maybe publishers will, like the old retailers, big box retailers, et cetera, maybe they'll have to reinvent themselves in the way that, retail didn't die, right? There was a couple of years ago.
Well, Amazon,
it's going to destroy all retail, right? We're not going to ever physically go into a store again. That actually didn't happen. Some retail died, some stores died, some sort of bad ways of doing retail, if you will, went away. but others reinvented retail and created new experiences. And so my question for the publishing community would be, what new experience are you going to create in an AI first world? Not how are you going to stay as an old, style retailer and try to hold on to that, but how are you going to take control and reinvent yourself in this new world?
And what I get nervous about is I don't think publishers are very good at reinventing themselves.
Well, some are. I mean, I would say that two things. One, Time Magazine is an example of a very old magazine brand that has done a phenomenal job of reinventing itself, growing revenue. When you hear about a publisher growing revenue, growing their brand, becoming very much so relevant, and very much so leaning into AI.
Yeah, what I meant more was the experience you get from consuming the news has not been reinvented that much on most of those websites.
I would agree, but I would say there are many publishers, including Time, working on that.
Yeah.
And I think there is an opportunity to do that. And so then the question becomes, it's sort of a first principles question in my mind, which is the people that create these experiences, that create the content itself, I think are in the best position to create some of these experiences. Who's gonna lean into it? You had someone on the pod, John Roberts, who I think is brilliant. And JR said something about, the question that a lot of people ask when there's something new like AI is, how is this going to impact me? And I'm going to paraphrase him, but he said something along the lines of, that's the wrong question. You should ask the question of, how are you going to impact it? How are you going to proactively, in other words, do things as a result of this thing and leverage it as a tool? That's a very different, and by the way, empowering way to look at it, as opposed to, how is this going to take advantage of me? I mean, look, I think that the LLMs have all the content. I don't think this question of...
Well, what I heard recently was the LLMs are spending less time training because they've already trained and more time fetching when you ask a question.
That's right. And I think then the question becomes, what does that future look like? So where are the LLMs going? And where do publishers and influencers and those who create content going? Right. And how are you proactively, in a smart way where you get paid, integrating into that ecosystem? And to me, those are the questions to be asking, and those are that's where to spend time, is where's the experience going, and how do I thoughtfully integrate into that experience in a way that you can get paid if you're a content creator.
And right now, all the LLMs are pretty much scraping the content, right?
Absolutely.
And it feels like it's one of the worst jobs in these companies, but they have to do it. They have to figure out that data's not great. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah. By the way, who is the largest bot on the internet right before LLMs? Google.
Right.
And so,
everyone allowed Google to scrape because the deal was you scrape and then you send me traffic.
Yeah, but by the way, we didn't know that was the deal in the beginning of it. So all we saw in the beginning of it was this thing Google has figured out a way. They didn't have ads when they started. We saw that Google had figured out a way to help you find content way more effectively than a directory, which was the thing that we basically had, or a bad search engine that didn't work, which was the thing we had right before Google. And so the first thing that Google did is they said, we are going to make it so what you say in the little text box gets you that as a result. We're going to find you the content you want. And people went, whoa, this is something amazing. It didn't have ads. It didn't have monetization. They then obviously innovated and figured out contextually relevant ads to the user's intent. I think we're going to see that on a really incredible pace with AI. I don't think it's about, text ads on the side of the screen.
Oh, I don't think text ads work on the side of the screen with AI.
I think what we're going to see is experiences that are far richer, far smarter, and far more contextually aware. And in that world, in a conversation, the data really matters, and what data it is, and whether it's data that's publicly accessible, whether it's data that's not publicly accessible.
I'm going back to your 90-10, right? 90% is not accessible. My question for you is, eventually many publishers believe an AI content marketplace will evolve, right? And then you'll have a marketplace and you'll say, I want to get this story, you'll pay some fee. But in addition to the story of the post, you get all this other metadata as well, right? You get how many words it is, what the traffic is. You get, maybe different versions of it, a summary.
Maybe audience insights. Maybe we know, maybe when I log into the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, maybe they know something about me. And maybe that inaccessible data is interesting and valuable if you're trying to form a more contextually complete picture and serve up an answer to me. And so I think the question we should be asking is, what are the assets? What are the data assets that we have, and how should those come together
The
with AI?
publishers have the greatest data assets ever created. They just have to figure a way to monetize it once they get around this programmatic to this AI agentic world and how it happens. And it's going to happen. It's just a question, does it happen today or take a couple more years?
Yeah, and my view would be start with the experience, right? Start with how it should work and figure out monetization in parallel to that. But I think anytime we've ever started with monetization, we've always failed. This happened in the record industry. This happened in just about every other category. This is how the payment model is going to be. Well,
start by making a great user experience.
That's right. Figure out how people should consume Time Magazine content. What is the right way to consume Time? What is the optimal way to consume a new Time Studio release? What's the right way for that to happen? Figure out that. Figure out how to create the content. Figure out how the user experience should be, and then figure out how to monetize it as part of that. And when you get those things right, I think it comes together.
Okay, Jonah, this was absolutely phenomenal. Love talking to you. I can go on and on, but we like to wrap it up after a certain amount of time. Jonah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This was a great conversation.
Thanks. Take care.